Captain William Harrison stood at attention in the grand hallway of Kensington Palace, his polished boots reflecting the morning sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. For 15 years he had served as the personal protection officer for the royal family, watching over them through countless public events, private moments, and everything in between. His dedication was legendary among palace staff, and his loyalty had never been questioned. But today was different. Today, William felt the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. His weathered hands, which had once steadied nervous royals and guided them through crowds, now trembled slightly as he adjusted his uniform one last time. The familiar sounds of the palace bustled around him, footsteps echoing through marble corridors, hushed conversations between staff members, and the distant chiming of the ancient grandfather clock that had marked time in these halls for generations. William's mind drifted back to the moment that changed everything. It had been 3 weeks ago when he received the phone call that shattered his world. His wife Sarah, his companion of 25 years, had collapsed at home while tending to her garden. The roses she loved so dearly had been blooming beautifully that day, their red petals scattered around her unconscious form when the neighbors found her. The ambulance ride to the hospital had been a blur of sirens and medical equipment, but the doctor's words remained crystal clear in William's memory. "Captain Harrison, your wife has suffered a severe stroke. The damage to her brain is extensive, and she will need round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. Her recovery, if any, will be slow and uncertain." The doctor had spoken with practiced compassion, but William heard only the finality in his voice. Sarah, who had once danced with him in their small kitchen while dinner cooked on the stove, now lay motionless in a hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped steadily through the night. The royal family had been incredibly understanding when William first requested time off to be with his wife. Prince George, though still young, had personally visited William in the hospital waiting room, bringing flowers and words of comfort. The gesture had touched William deeply, reminding him why he had dedicated his life to protecting this family. They were not just his duty. They had become part of his own family over the years. As the days passed, William found himself torn between two worlds. During the day, he would return to his post at the palace, ensuring the safety of the royals with his usual meticulous attention to detail. But his heart remained in the sterile hospital room where Sarah lay, sometimes opening her eyes to look at him with confusion, sometimes not recognizing him at all. The rehabilitation center had explained that she would need constant supervision, help with basic tasks like eating and walking, and emotional support as she struggled to rebuild her shattered memories. William's colleagues noticed the change in him immediately. Detective Inspector Margaret Cole, who had worked alongside him for 8 years, observed how his usually sharp focus seemed scattered. "You're not yourself, Will," she had said gently one afternoon as they reviewed security protocols. "When did you last have a proper night's sleep?" William had managed a weak smile, knowing that sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford. Between his palace duties and hospital visits, he was lucky to manage 3 or 4 hours of rest each night. The financial burden was mounting as well. Sarah's medical bills were substantial, and the specialized care facility she needed was expensive. William's salary as a royal protection officer was respectable, but it was not enough to cover the costs of private care while maintaining their mortgage and other expenses. He had already emptied their savings account and was considering taking out loans against their modest home. The stress was eating away at him, creating dark circles under his eyes and adding gray to his once brown hair. Prince George, now 12 years old and remarkably perceptive for his age, had begun to notice William's distress. During their daily security briefings, the young prince would ask thoughtful questions about William's well-being, showing a maturity that often surprised the palace staff. "Captain Harrison, you seem tired today. Is everything all right with Mrs. Harrison?" he would ask with genuine concern in his voice. William always assured him that everything was fine, but the boy's intuitive nature made it difficult to hide his struggles completely. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when William received another call from the hospital. Sarah had developed pneumonia during the night, and her condition had worsened significantly. As he rushed through the palace corridors, his radio crackled with updates about the day's schedule, reminding him that Prince George had 3 important appointments that required his presence. Standing in the hospital elevator, watching the floor numbers climb toward the intensive care unit, William realized that he could no longer serve two masters. That evening, after spending hours at Sarah's bedside listening to the rhythm of her labored breathing, William sat in his small office at the palace and began writing his resignation letter. The words came slowly, each sentence carefully crafted to express his gratitude while explaining his impossible situation. He wrote about his years of faithful service, the honor he felt in protecting the royal family, and the devastating circumstances that now required his full attention. The letter was both professional and deeply personal, revealing the man behind the uniform who was struggling to balance duty with love. As he sealed the envelope containing his resignation, William felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. He was giving up more than just a job. He was leaving behind a calling that had defined his adult life. The palace had been his second home, the royal family his extended family, and his fellow protection officers his brothers and sisters in arms. But Sarah needed him now more than anyone ever had, and William knew that some choices, no matter how difficult, had to be made with the heart rather than the head. The next morning, William placed his resignation letter on the desk of Commander Patricia Wells, the head of Royal Security. His hands were steady now, the decision having brought him an unexpected sense of peace despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Commander Wells was known throughout the palace for her no-nonsense approach and sharp intellect, but she had always treated William with respect and fairness. He knew that if anyone would understand his situation, it would be her. Commander Wells arrived at her office an hour later, her usual brisk pace slowing when she noticed the formal envelope bearing her name in William's familiar handwriting. She had worked with enough security personnel over the years to recognize the weight of such correspondence. After reading the letter twice, she sat back in her leather chair and sighed deeply. William Harrison was not just any protection officer. He was the gold standard by which others were measured. His departure would create a significant gap in their security detail, particularly for Prince George, who had developed a trusting relationship with the veteran officer. Meanwhile, Prince George was beginning his day with his usual routine of breakfast and morning lessons. His tutor, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, noticed that the young prince seemed distracted, frequently glancing toward the door as if expecting someone. "Is Captain Harrison joining us for the security briefing today?" Prince George asked, his voice carrying a note of concern that surprised his tutor. For a 12-year-old, he had developed an unusual awareness of the people who surrounded him daily, remembering names and asking about their families with genuine interest. "I believe he will be along shortly, Your Highness," Mrs. Hartwell replied, though she had noticed that the usual morning security check had been conducted by a different officer. Prince George nodded but continued to appear unsettled throughout his mathematics lesson, his attention drifting from algebraic equations to thoughts about the kind man who had protected him for as long as he could remember. In the security office, Commander Wells was already making phone calls to arrange temporary coverage while she processed William's resignation. The palace operated on precise schedules and protocols, and any disruption required immediate attention. She knew that finding a replacement for William would not be simple. His experience, judgment, and the trust he had built with the family could not be easily replicated. More concerning was the impact his departure might have on Prince George, who had grown accustomed to William's steady presence during public appearances and private moments alike. William spent the morning completing his final rounds, checking security measures and briefing his temporary replacement on the specific requirements for Prince George's protection. Detective Inspector Cole accompanied him, asking detailed questions about the prince's preferences and habits. "He likes to stop and speak with people during public walkabouts," William explained as they reviewed crowd control procedures. "Never rush him when he's talking to children or elderly people. He has a gift for making people feel special, and that's not something we should discourage for the sake of schedule efficiency." As the day progressed, word of William's resignation began to spread quietly through the palace staff. Sarah Chen, one of Prince George's private secretaries, overheard two housekeepers discussing the situation in hushed tones. The news troubled her because she had witnessed firsthand the bond between the prince and his protection officer. During overseas trips and public engagements, William had served as more than just security. He had been a source of calm reassurance for a young boy navigating the complexities of royal life. Prince George's afternoon was filled with his weekly piano, lesson and a session with his riding instructor at the palace stables. Throughout both activities, he found himself looking for William's familiar figure, expecting to see him positioned at his usual observation point. When Detective Inspector Cole appeared instead, Prince George politely acknowledged the change but privately wondered where Captain Harrison had gone. His natural politeness prevented him from asking directly, but his observant nature made it impossible to ignore the shift in his security detail. That evening, as William prepared to leave the palace for what he believed would be the last time, he encountered Prince George in the corridor outside the music room. The young prince was carrying his violin case, having just finished practicing for an upcoming recital. Their eyes met, and William felt a pang of regret at not having had the opportunity to say a proper goodbye. Protocol dictated that personal relationships between protection officers and their charges should remain professional. But over the years, a genuine affection had developed between the veteran officer and the thoughtful young prince. "Captain Harrison," Prince George said, approaching with his characteristic blend of formality and warmth. "I haven't seen much of you today. I hope everything is well." The innocence in his voice made William's heart heavy with the knowledge that he would soon be absent from the boy's daily life entirely. William had watched Prince George grow from a curious 8-year-old into the intelligent and compassionate young man who now stood before him, and the thought of missing his continued development was deeply painful. "Everything is fine, Your Highness," William replied, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I trust Detective Inspector Cole has been taking good care of you today." Prince George nodded, but his perceptive eyes seemed to sense that something was not quite right. The boy had inherited his grandmother's ability to read people, a skill that served him well in understanding the moods and concerns of those around him. "Will I see you tomorrow for the museum visit?" Prince George asked, referring to a scheduled educational trip to the British Museum that had been planned for weeks. William felt his throat tighten as he realized that he would not be there to ensure the prince's safety during the outing, something that had been part of his responsibilities for months. The meticulous planning and security arrangements he had put in place would now be executed by someone else. "Detective Inspector Cole will be accompanying you, Your Highness. She is extremely capable and will ensure everything goes smoothly," William managed to say, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. Prince George accepted this information with his usual grace, but William could see a flicker of confusion cross the boy's features. Children, even royal ones, found comfort in routine and familiar faces, and changes in their daily environment rarely went unnoticed. As Prince George continued toward his evening tutoring session, William watched him walk away with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The boy carried himself with a dignity that belied his young age, and William knew that he would grow into a remarkable leader. Not being there to witness that growth felt like losing a piece of his own future, but William also knew that Sarah needed him more than anyone in the world right now. Commander Wells intercepted William as he headed toward the exit, her expression serious but understanding. "Your resignation has been processed," she said quietly. "However, I want you to know that this door remains open should your circumstances change. Officers of your caliber and character are rare, William. The family will miss you more than you know." Her words were both a professional courtesy and a genuine expression of regret at losing such a valued member of their team. 2 days after William's resignation, Prince George sat in his private study reviewing French vocabulary with his language tutor, when an unusual disturbance in the corridor caught his attention. Through the partially open door, he could hear hushed voices discussing changes to security arrangements and mentions of Captain Harrison's sudden absence. The young prince had always been curious about the inner workings of palace life, and these fragments of conversation sparked his concern about the man who had been a constant presence in his daily routine. During his afternoon break, Prince George made a decision that would have surprised many adults who underestimated his initiative and compassion. Instead of heading to the gardens for his usual walk, he made his way to Commander Wells's office, his footsteps echoing with purpose through the ornate hallways. The palace staff he encountered along the way bowed respectfully, but several exchanged glances of surprise at seeing the young prince moving through administrative areas typically beyond his usual routes. "Commander." Wells was reviewing personnel files when her assistant announced Prince George's unexpected visit. Rising quickly from her desk, She welcomed him with the formal courtesy required by protocol, though her mind raced with questions about what might have prompted this unusual request for a meeting. Prince George entered with his characteristic poise, but Commander Wells noticed an intensity in his expression that suggested this was more than a casual social call. "Commander Wells, I hope I'm not interrupting important work," Prince George began, displaying the diplomatic skills that had been carefully cultivated through years of royal education. "I wanted to speak with you about Captain Harrison. I've noticed he hasn't been present for the past few days, and I'm concerned about his well-being." His directness surprised Commander Wells, who had expected a more circuitous approach to the topic from someone so young. Commander Wells found herself in a delicate position, balancing her duty to maintain appropriate boundaries regarding personnel matters with her respect for Prince George's genuine concern. "Your Highness, Captain Harrison has taken some personal leave to attend to family matters," she replied carefully. "These situations sometimes require extended time away from palace duties." She hoped this explanation would satisfy the prince's curiosity without revealing the full extent of William's personal crisis. However, Prince George possessed an intuitive understanding that went beyond his years, particularly when it came to reading between the lines of adult conversations. "Is Mrs. Harrison unwell?" he asked gently, his voice carrying the same compassionate tone he had learned to use when speaking with people during public engagements. "Captain Harrison mentioned her garden during one of our conversations last month. He seemed very proud of her roses." The specificity of his memory impressed Commander Wells, who realized that the young prince paid far more attention to personal details than most people recognized. The question placed Commander Wells in an even more challenging position. She could see the genuine worry in Prince George's eyes and recognized that his concern stemmed from authentic care rather than mere curiosity. After a moment of consideration, she decided that honesty within appropriate limits would serve everyone better than deflection. "Mrs. Harrison has indeed been quite ill, Your Highness. Captain Harrison is dedicating his time to caring for her during this difficult period." Prince George absorbed this information with the gravity it deserved, his young face reflecting the weight of understanding that sometimes life presents people with impossible choices. "Has he resigned from his position?" he asked quietly, the question revealing that his understanding of the situation was more complete than Commander Wells had anticipated. The boy's perceptiveness reminded her why the royal family was often praised for their ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Commander Wells nodded slowly, recognizing that Prince George deserved an honest answer to his direct question. "Yes, Your Highness." Captain Harrison felt that his wife's condition required his full attention, and he could not fulfill his duties here while providing the care she needs at home. She watched as Prince George processed this information, his expression cycling through understanding, sadness, and what appeared to be determination. "I see," Prince George said thoughtfully, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that mirrored his father's contemplative posture. "Captain Harrison has always spoken about duty and service as the highest calling. It must have been very difficult for him to make this decision." His insight into the emotional complexity of William's situation impressed Commander Wells, who realized she was witnessing a young man grappling with adult concepts of sacrifice and responsibility. After a few moments of silence, Prince George straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Commander Wells, with an expression that seemed older than his 12 years. "Commander Wells, I would like to request information about Mrs. Harrison's condition and the type of care she requires. I believe there might be ways the palace could assist Captain Harrison during this challenging time." His formal tone and clear articulation left no doubt that this was a serious request rather than a childish impulse. Commander Wells felt a mixture of pride and concern at Prince George's proposal. While his compassionate instincts were admirable, she worried about the appropriateness of involving a young prince in the personal struggles of palace staff. "Your Highness, while your concern is commendable, there are protocols and boundaries that govern these types of situations. Captain Harrison's personal circumstances, while tragic, are generally considered private matters that fall outside the scope of official palace involvement. However, Prince George had clearly given this matter considerable thought before approaching her office. I understand the protocols, Commander Wells, but I also understand that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses. Captain Harrison has served our family with distinction for 15 years. His loyalty and dedication have never wavered, and now he faces a situation that forces him to choose between his duty to us and his duty to his wife. Surely we can find a way to honor both commitments. The mature reasoning behind Prince George's argument caught Commander Wells off guard. She had expected emotional appeals or impulsive suggestions, but instead found herself facing a carefully constructed proposal that demonstrated remarkable understanding of both human nature and institutional responsibility. "What exactly are you suggesting, Your Highness?" she asked, genuinely curious about what solution the young prince might have conceived. Prince George moved closer to her desk, his posture reflecting the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time developing his proposal. "I would like to meet with my father to discuss creating a special provision for Captain Harrison. Perhaps we could arrange for Mrs. Harrison to receive care through the Royal Medical Trust, or provide financial assistance that would allow Captain Harrison to hire private nurses while maintaining his position here. I believe there are precedents for the palace supporting staff members during family crises." Commander Wells realized that Prince George had done more than simply notice William's absence. He had researched potential solutions and considered the institutional mechanisms that might be available to address the situation. His proposal demonstrated not only compassion, but also a sophisticated understanding of how large organizations could adapt their policies to support valued employees during extraordinary circumstances. The combination of empathy and strategic thinking suggested that the young prince was developing into exactly the kind of leader the monarchy would need in future years. That evening, Prince George requested a private meeting with his father, Prince William, in the comfortable study that served as their informal gathering place for family discussions. The room, lined with books and family photographs, had witnessed many important conversations over the years, but tonight felt different to the young prince. He had spent hours preparing for this discussion, understanding that his proposal would require careful presentation and mature reasoning to be taken seriously by his father. Prince William noticed immediately that his son carried himself with unusual formality as he entered the study. George's posture and expression reminded him of the way he himself had approached difficult conversations with his own father during his youth. "You seem to have something significant on your mind tonight, George," Prince William observed, setting aside the government papers he had been reviewing. "Please sit and tell me what's troubling you." Prince George settled into the leather armchair across from his father, his hands folded carefully in his lap as he had been taught during formal etiquette lessons. "Father, I need to speak with you about Captain Harrison and a situation that I believe requires our immediate attention and intervention." His opening statement was direct and purposeful, indicating that this was not a casual inquiry, but a serious matter that had been weighing on his mind. Prince William leaned forward slightly, his attention fully focused on his son's words. He had heard about William Harrison's resignation through official channels, but the personnel matter had been handled by Security Administration and had not crossed his desk for personal review. "Go on," he encouraged, sensing that George had given this matter considerable thought and preparation before requesting this meeting. "Captain Harrison has resigned from his position because his wife has suffered a severe stroke and requires constant care," Prince George began, his voice steady. Despite the emotional weight of the subject matter, he felt he could not fulfill his duties to our family while providing the attention and support that Mrs. Harrison needs during her recovery. "I believe this situation presents us with an opportunity to demonstrate the values of loyalty, compassion, and service that you have taught me are central to our role as members of the royal family." Prince William was struck by his son's mature articulation of complex emotional and ethical concepts. At 12 years old, George was already grasping the nuanced responsibilities that came with their position and the importance of translating abstract principles into concrete actions. "You've clearly given this situation serious consideration, George. What specifically do you think we should do to help the Harrison family?" Prince George straightened in his chair, his preparation evident in the organized way he presented his proposal. "I've spoken with Commander Wells about the palace's previous support for staff members facing family emergencies. There are precedents for providing medical assistance and temporary financial support during extraordinary circumstances. I believe we could arrange for Mrs. Harrison to receive care through the Royal Medical Trust, which would allow Captain Harrison to maintain his position while ensuring his wife receives the best possible treatment. The sophistication of George's research impressed his father, who realized that his son had not only identified a problem, but had investigated potential solutions using appropriate channels and existing institutional frameworks. "Have you considered the broader implications of such an arrangement?" Prince William asked, not to discourage his son but to ensure that George understood the complexity of creating special provisions for individual staff members. "Yes, Father, I have," Prince George replied confidently. "I understand that creating exceptions for one employee could set precedents that might be difficult to manage in the future. However, Captain Harrison's 15 years of exemplary service combined with the extraordinary nature of his circumstances make this situation unique rather than typical. Additionally, retaining his experience and institutional knowledge benefits our security operations significantly more than the cost of supporting his family." During this crisis, Prince William found himself genuinely impressed by his son's analysis, which balanced compassionate instincts with practical considerations and institutional awareness. George had managed to construct an argument that addressed both the human elements of the situation and the administrative realities of running a large organization. "You've made a compelling case, George. But I'm curious about your personal connection to this situation. Why is Captain Harrison's welfare particularly important to you?" Prince George's expression softened as he considered how to articulate feelings that went beyond professional relationships and touched on genuine human connection. "Captain Harrison has been more than just a protection officer to me, Father. He's been a steady presence during some of the most challenging moments of growing up in this role. When crowds become overwhelming or protocols feel burdensome, he has a way of helping me remember why our work matters. He talks about service as something that connects us to other people, rather than separating us from them." The personal dimension of George's attachment to William Harrison added depth to his formal proposal, revealing the boy's capacity for forming meaningful relationships, despite the formal boundaries that typically governed interactions between royals and their staff. Prince William recognized that his son was learning to value the people who supported their family, not just as employees, but as individuals worthy of care and consideration. "There's something else, Father," Prince George continued, his voice taking on a more vulnerable tone. "I've been thinking about what I would want someone to do if our family faced a similar crisis. If something happened to Mother, I would hope that people who cared about our family would find ways to help rather than simply accepting the situation as unfortunate but unavoidable. Captain Harrison has protected us for 15 years. The least we can do is protect him when he needs our support." This personal reflection demonstrated that George's proposal stemmed not from abstract principles, but from genuine empathy and the ability to imagine himself in similar circumstances. Prince William realized that his son was developing the kind of emotional intelligence that would serve him well in future leadership roles, where understanding human motivation and responding to individual needs would be crucial skills. "You've presented this matter with remarkable thoughtfulness and maturity, George," Prince William said, his pride in his son evident in both his tone and expression. "I think your proposal has significant merit, both from a humanitarian perspective and from a practical standpoint. Let me arrange meetings with the appropriate administrators to explore how we might structure the kind of support you're suggesting for the Harrison family." Prince George's face brightened with relief and gratitude, but he maintained his composed demeanor as he responded to his father's decision. "Thank you, Father. I hope we can act quickly, as I believe Captain Harrison is struggling with mounting medical expenses and the stress of trying to manage everything alone. Time is important when someone is facing such overwhelming circumstances." The urgency in George's voice reminded Prince William that while they could afford to deliberate carefully about policy implications and procedural details, the Harrison family was dealing with immediate financial and emotional pressures that would not wait for bureaucratic processes to unfold slowly. Sometimes leadership required balancing thoughtful consideration with decisive action, a lesson that George seemed to understand intuitively despite his young age. The following morning brought a flurry of activity as Prince William moved swiftly to implement his son's proposal. He began with a call to Sir Edward Matthews, the palace's chief administrator, who had overseen personnel policies and special provisions for over 2 decades. Sir Edward's experience with unusual situations and his understanding of both royal Protocol and human resources law made him the ideal person to structure a support arrangement that would be both effective and appropriate. Sir Edward, I need you to research our options for providing emergency medical and financial assistance to William Harrison, Prince William explained during their early morning meeting. My son has brought to my attention the exceptional circumstances surrounding Harrison's resignation, and I believe we have both a moral obligation and a practical interest in finding a way to support his family during this crisis. The formality of his language reflected the serious nature of the request while emphasizing that this was a priority matter, requiring immediate attention. Sir Edward, who had known William Harrison professionally for many years, understood immediately why this situation warranted special consideration. Harrison's reputation for integrity, professionalism, and dedication was legendary throughout the palace, and his sudden departure had created both operational challenges and emotional gaps within the security team. Your Highness, there are several mechanisms we could employ, Sir Edward replied thoughtfully. The Royal Medical Trust has provisions for emergency care, and we have discretionary funds available for staff experiencing extraordinary hardship. The key will be structuring the assistance in a way that preserves Captain Harrison's dignity while providing meaningful support. Meanwhile, Prince George was proceeding with his regular schedule of lessons and activities, but those around him noticed an unusual energy and focus in his demeanor. His mathematics tutor, Dr. Rebecca Thompson, observed that the young prince seemed more engaged than usual, asking questions that demonstrated he was thinking about real-world applications of abstract concepts. During a lesson on percentages and financial calculations, George inquired about medical insurance systems and how families typically managed unexpected healthcare expenses. Your Highness seems particularly interested in practical mathematics today, Dr. Thompson noted with a smile. Are you working on a special project that requires these calculations? Prince George considered his response carefully, wanting to be truthful without revealing details of private palace business that were not appropriate for general discussion. I've been thinking about how mathematical concepts apply to problem solving in real situations, George replied diplomatically. Understanding percentages and financial planning seems important for making informed decisions about helping people who face unexpected challenges. His answer satisfied his tutor's curiosity while demonstrating the practical thinking that had impressed his father during their previous evening's conversation. At the same time, William Harrison was sitting in the hospital cafeteria during one of Sarah's therapy sessions, staring at a stack of medical bills that had arrived in that morning's mail. The numbers on the papers seemed to grow larger each time he looked at them, and the reality of their financial situation was becoming increasingly overwhelming. His savings account was nearly empty. Their credit cards were approaching their limits, and the mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. The irony was not lost on him that he was worrying about money while sitting in one of London's most expensive private medical facilities. Sarah's progress had been minimal, but encouraging. She could now recognize William most of the time, and her speech had improved enough for simple conversations. However, the doctors had made it clear that her recovery would require months or possibly years of intensive therapy, specialized equipment, and round-the-clock monitoring. The costs associated with this level of care far exceeded anything William had anticipated when he made the decision to resign from his palace position. His phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Inspector Cole, asking how he was managing and whether he needed anything from his former colleagues. The kindness of the gesture brought tears to William's eyes, reminding him of the supportive community he had left behind at the palace. He had spent 15 years building relationships with people who had become like family to him, and now he felt isolated and alone with problems that seemed too large to solve. Back at the palace, Sir Edward was making rapid progress on structuring the assistance package for the Harrison family. His research had revealed that the Royal Medical Trust had previously covered emergency treatments for staff members and their families in exceptional circumstances. Additionally, the palace had a discretionary fund specifically designated for supporting employees facing hardship due to circumstances beyond their control. The challenge was determining how to provide meaningful assistance without creating awkward precedents or compromising William's dignity. The medical trust can cover Mrs. Harrison's immediate treatment, costs, and ongoing therapy expenses, Sir Edward explained to Prince William during their afternoon meeting. We can also provide temporary financial assistance to help with household expenses, while Captain Harrison focuses on his wife's care. However, I believe the most meaningful support would be offering him a flexible work arrangement that allows him to maintain his position while accommodating his caregiving responsibilities. Prince William found this suggestion particularly appealing because it addressed both the family's financial needs and William's professional identity. What would such an arrangement look like practically? He asked, considering how security protocols might accommodate irregular schedules and divided attention. We could create a consulting role that allows Captain Harrison to work on special projects and training programs from home or the hospital, Sir Edward proposed. His experience and knowledge are valuable assets that we could utilize in ways that don't require his physical presence for regular protection duties. This approach would maintain his income and benefits while giving him the flexibility to care for his wife. The elegance of this solution impressed Prince William, because it transformed what could have been simple charity into a mutually beneficial arrangement that preserved William's professional pride while addressing his family's needs. Excellent thinking, Sir Edward. Let's move forward with implementing this plan immediately. I want Captain Harrison to understand that this assistance comes from our genuine appreciation for his service, rather than pity for his circumstances. As the day progressed, Commander Wells received official authorization to contact William Harrison with an offer that she hoped would change everything for his family. The conversation would be delicate, requiring her to present the palace's assistance in a way that emphasized William's value to the organization rather than his need for help. She understood that men like William Harrison, who had dedicated their careers to protecting others, often struggled with accepting support when they found themselves in vulnerable positions. Prince George spent his evening practicing piano, but his mind kept drifting to thoughts about Captain Harrison and the hope that their intervention would arrive in time to make a real difference. He had learned an important lesson about the power of speaking up when something seemed wrong, and about the responsibility that came with his position to use his influence for good. Tomorrow would bring the answer to whether their efforts had been successful in reaching a man who had given so much to their family. William Harrison was sitting beside Sarah's hospital bed, holding her hand and reading aloud from the gardening magazine she had always loved, when his phone rang with a call from Commander Wells. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was another bill collector or insurance representative, but the familiar number on his screen made him curious enough to step into the hallway. "Commander Wells," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. "William, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," Commander Wells began, her tone warmer than their usual professional exchanges. "I wanted to speak with you about a rather unusual development here at the palace. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" There was something in her voice that made William pause, a hint of excitement or anticipation that seemed out of place given his recent resignation and current circumstances. "Of course, Commander," William replied, leaning against the hospital wall and watching nurses move efficiently through the corridor. "What can I do for you?" He assumed she might be calling with questions about security procedures or perhaps to ask him to recommend candidates for his replacement. Standard administrative matters that would require his input even after his departure. "Actually, William, this conversation is about what we can do for you," Commander Wells said, and William could hear papers rustling in the background as she consulted her notes. "Prince George has brought your situation to the attention of his father, and together, they have proposed a comprehensive support package that we believe will address many of the challenges your family is currently facing." William felt his knees weaken slightly, and he steadied himself against the wall as he processed what Commander Wells had just told him. Prince George, a 12-year-old boy, had somehow learned about his personal crisis and had taken action to help. The gesture was so unexpected and touching that William found himself struggling to respond appropriately. "I'm not sure I understand, Commander. Prince George spoke to his father about my resignation." "More than that, William," Commander Wells continued, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "He researched potential solutions and presented his father with a detailed proposal for supporting your family during this difficult time." The young prince was quite persuasive, in arguing that your years of faithful service warrant exceptional consideration during exceptional circumstances. As Commander Wells explained the details of the assistance package. William felt emotions he had been suppressing for weeks threatening to overwhelm him. The Royal Medical Trust would cover all of Sarah's treatment costs, including the specialized therapy and equipment she needed. The palace would provide temporary financial assistance to help with household expenses and medical bills that had already accumulated. Most importantly, they were offering him a flexible consulting position that would allow him to maintain his income and benefits while caring for Sarah. "This is incredibly generous," William managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't understand why Prince George would involve himself in my personal affairs. I've always tried to maintain appropriate professional boundaries." The concept of a young royal taking such personal interest in the welfare of a staff member challenged everything William understood about the traditional distance between the royal family and their employees. "Commander," Wells chuckled softly before responding, "William, you've clearly made a stronger impression on that young man than you realized. He spoke about you with genuine affection and respect, describing how your steady presence has helped him navigate the challenges of his role. He seemed to view your current situation not as an employee's personal problem, but as a crisis affecting someone he considers important to his life." The realization that his relationship with Prince George had meant something significant to the boy touched William deeply. He had always been careful to maintain professional boundaries, but he couldn't deny that he had developed genuine fondness for the thoughtful, perceptive young prince who asked intelligent questions and treated everyone around him with kindness and respect. To learn that those feelings had been reciprocated and that Prince George had acted on his concern filled William with a mixture of gratitude and humility. "When would this arrangement begin?" William asked, his practical nature asserting itself as he began to consider the implications of returning to work while managing Sarah's care. The flexibility of a consulting role appealed to him because it would allow him to schedule his palace responsibilities around Sarah's therapy sessions and medical appointments. "Immediately, if you're willing to accept the offer," Commander Wells replied. "Sir Edward has already processed the paperwork, and the medical trust has been contacted about covering Mrs. Harrison's expenses. We understand that time is crucial when dealing with medical bills and insurance companies." The efficiency with which the palace had moved to address his situation impressed William and demonstrated the sincerity of their commitment to helping his family. After ending the call with Commander Wells, William stood in the hospital corridor for several minutes, trying to process the unexpected turn his life had taken. Just days ago, he had felt trapped by impossible choices and overwhelming financial pressures. Now, thanks to the compassion and initiative of a 12-year-old prince, a path forward had opened that would allow him to care for Sarah while maintaining his professional identity and financial stability. When he returned to Sarah's room, she was awake and looking around with the confused expression that had become familiar during her recovery. "William," she said tentatively, her voice soft but clear, "you look different today. Happier, maybe?" Even in her diminished state, Sarah could still read his moods with the intuitive understanding that had made their 25-year marriage such a source of strength for both of them. "Something wonderful has happened, love," William said, taking her hand and settling back into the chair beside her bed. "It seems we have some very special friends who care about us more than we knew." As he began to explain the palace's offer of assistance, Sarah listened with growing amazement and gratitude. Even in her compromised state, she understood the extraordinary nature of what Prince George had done for their family. 3 weeks later, William returned to the palace for his first day in his new consulting role, wearing his familiar uniform but carrying himself with a lightness that had been absent for months. Prince George was waiting for him in the security office, having specifically requested to be present when Captain Harrison resumed his duties. The young prince's face lit up with genuine joy when he saw William, and for a moment, the formal protocols that usually governed their interactions seemed less important than the human connection they shared. "Captain Harrison," Prince George said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both formal and warmly personal. "Welcome back. I've missed having you here." The sincerity in his voice and the maturity of his demeanor reminded William why he had always believed this young man would grow into an exceptional leader. "Your Highness," William replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for what you and your father have done for my family. Your kindness has given us hope during the darkest period of our lives. As they shook hands, both the veteran protection officer and the young prince understood that their relationship had evolved into something deeper than duty and protocol. It had become a bond of mutual respect and genuine caring that would endure for years to come.